so touched being here. I'm a girl from the Bronx. To be welcomed here in this state, all of us together, seeing our common cause, this is what this country is all about.
I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I don't know if you guys are paying attention to what's going on the other side of the aisle, but the Democrats are already doing the Democratic primary for the 2028 presidency. You have Cory Booker doing his dramatic stunt, the filibuster, to break all filibusters, even though it's not technically a filibuster because he wasn't actually holding up any legislation at the time that he was pulling the stunt. But also we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Tim Walz going around the country talking to right-wing folks, wink wink, just going to states that are red states and talking to left-wing people in those states, and they are all trying to position themselves as the next person in line, as the person that is going to run against whoever the Republicans nominate in 2028. And make no mistake about it, Ocasio-Cortez is in the mix as of 2028, and this is why I am pretty sure she is going to run for president of the United States. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because while a lot of people are dismissing this as ridiculous, absurd, over the top, the fact is she actually has a chance of winning, because if you can win the nomination in your party, as Donald Trump proved first in 2016, you can be president of the United States. But before we get into this, before we break this down, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
Don't let them trick us into thinking we are enemies. Don't let them trick us into thinking we can be separated into rural and urban, black and white and Latino. We are one.
So as you can see right here, what we're seeing from the Team AOC account is clearly and obviously a presidential election ad. This is meant to generate money from all these different donors across this country, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, bare minimum, is considering primarying Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer, but maximum, she is setting herself up for a presidential run in 2028. And again, it is entirely possible that she can win this. First and foremost, Ocasio-Cortez is one of the more attractive politicians that we have, because of the fact that she beat Crowley back in the day and the mainstream media anointed her the progressive queen. She has the name recognition within the party to also make a push forward in order to get that nomination. Remember, all the big figures, all the recognizable names of the Democratic yesteryear, they're all gone. They're not on the board. Probably the guy with the highest name brand recognition going into the 2028 primary is Gavin Newsom. Maybe you could throw Gretchen Whitmer in the mix, but even they aren't as shiny and new as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is currently right now going on this tour with Bernie Sanders called the Fighting Oligarchy Tour, so he can symbolically pass the torch to her, because he's finally considering himself too old to run for president of the United States in 2028. Although make no mistake about it, he likely would run and get the same amount of support, lose again like he did the previous two times. But this is what's going on. This is what's happening in the Democratic Party right now. We are seeing a struggle, a bunch of people positioning themselves to take this office. AOC on one end, you have Tim Walz, you have the ghost of Kamala Harris, who's still looking to get paid for speeches, who probably isn't actually going to run because she wants to save herself the embarrassment. And I just want you guys to understand that everybody in the right wing is going to tell you that this woman has no chance at the presidency, but she is going to come in with that Bernie Sanders base and a bunch of the identitarian base as a strength, along with name recognition in a field where name recognition isn't a thing. Also, I want to point out that one of the reasons why she's incentivized to run for president of the United States is that there's no downside. Again, we saw with Bernie Sanders, he ended up losing to Hillary Clinton, he ended up losing to Joe Biden, but his popularity overall nationwide didn't go down, it went up. One of the things that people don't realize is that losing a presidential election in the general election stains you with the loser label for the rest of your political career, President Trump in 2020 notwithstanding. But losing in the primary gives you all sorts of opportunities to build up to run again, and obviously Ocasio-Cortez is pushing the ball forward so that she can have her political career, because if you guys will recall, she's not that old. So unlike Bernie Sanders, who ran for president first when he was 103, she has many more runs in her lifetime, and eventually she's betting on the fact that she will become the Democratic nominee. That is the whole point of this oligarchy tour. That is the whole point of this Team AOC ad.
Alexandria, they told us this was a conservative state. They got it wrong.
Idaho, I know that looking around here, it can feel impossible for Republicans out here to be defeated. That's not true. It's simply not true.
So look, this is a presidential ad. It is meant to be propaganda. Propaganda to show the passing of the torch from Bernie Sanders to his communist successor, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But make no mistake about it, it is still ridiculous in terms of substance. So here you have Bernie Sanders saying, Idaho, I heard you were a conservative state. But obviously this crowd says different. And then that's followed up by Ocasio-Cortez saying, look, a lot of people think it's impossible for a Republican to lose in this state, but I'm just going to tell you that's not the case. Now, she goes on in addition to this with her whole additional spiel that we will play a little bit later, but I just want to point out that every single state, no matter if it's the reddest of the red or the bluest of the blue, has their opposite party represented in some way, shape, or form, and these are the people that are showing up to these rallies. I mean, Bill Maher, the comedian, the atheist comedian, talks about how he always finds good crowds in the Bible Belt, some of the most religious parts of the country, because guess what? The non-religious people are the ones who buy tickets to show up to his events. Just like the non-conservative people, the non-Republican people in Idaho, even though that's the overwhelming majority of Idahoans, show up to this event. It is not that they are reaching Republicans or anything of the sort. That's ridiculous and absurd. These are some of the most left-wing people. Ocasio-Cortez actually made me laugh because she said Latino in the middle of this ad when she is one of the biggest advocates of not only using the term Latin X, but she also wants to use terms like Latin at and Latine. And if you don't believe me, I got a video for that right here.
I wanted to have a note on gender inclusivity in Spanish language. People sometimes like to make a lot of drama over the term Latinx, but even before Latinx, people were trying to do this, like use an at to have the A and the O together. Gender is fluid, language is fluid, and I think people right now are using the E term as gender neutral in order to be as inclusive as possible. Don't have to make drama over it. I also have a mini rant about this because there are some politicians, including Democratic politicians, that rail against the term Latinx. And they're like, this is so bad. This is so bad for the party, like blah, blah, blah. And like, it's almost as though it has not struck some of these folks that another person's identity is not about your reelection prospects. Like, this is not about you. Second of all, if putting a little X on your campaign literature is what you think is the difference between winning or losing an election, you need to talk about healthcare more. You need to raise people's wages. You need to talk about more issues that also matter to people. That being said, why are people opting for trying to use Latine over Latinx? Well, Latinx can be convenient in written form because you just put down an X and people can kind of mentally put in whatever vowel they identify with. But it's kind of hard to say. So Latine, you avoid the masculine O, you avoid the feminine A. Latine, E, is a little more neutral, so it can be more inclusive to people. For example, saying nosotres. That being said, if you don't want to use it, no one's forcing you to. But for people who enjoy trying to figure out language and have it meet the modern age, that's kind of where it's at.
Black and right and Latino and Latino.
So yeah, make no mistake about it, she's not winning over any conservatives, she's not winning over any Republicans. It would be ridiculous to suggest that. What we're seeing with this Idaho crowd is the left wing, the greatly outnumbered left wing people in the state of Idaho. But that being said, who she could win over, who she could appeal to, are independents, because even though there's a bunch of different reasons why the evil orange man was elected for his second term in 2024, the fact is the main reason that was undergirding everything happens to be the economy. And right now, and I know a lot of people don't want to say it, they don't want to acknowledge it, the tariffs being put on and off and all the different chaos and its impact on the economy are creating trouble for President Trump. And it's not just me saying it. His numbers, which are so much better than the Democrats on the issue of the economy based on his first term and that economy, are underwater with the American people. And of course, independents are the ones who decide this election. So what we're ultimately ending up looking at, if there is a Trump recession, is not a four-dimensional chess maneuver by Trump in order to rejigger the economy in some amazing and stellar way. It's Trump using his second term to end up losing the 2028 election for the next person. And by the way, not really accomplishing much, because what is going on right now is that he throws on the tariffs, then takes off the tariffs, throws on the tariffs, then takes off the tariffs. And while the market tends to respond to both, what we notice is that the stock market will drop because it's trying to forecast what's going on. And when it kicks back up, when it rises again, it doesn't actually reach the previous level. So we're actually seeing damage because the chaos in it of itself, the inconsistency in the policy, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, is actually creating problems in the market and creating problems in the economy. Look, I probably have to do an entire video on tariffs, when they're effective in terms of national security and the downside impact on the economy later on this channel, so I can break this down a little bit further. But what you need to know is that you're never going to get from me the kind of sycophantic devotion to the evil orange man that you get from a bunch of these other people that are commenting on this situation. I am not going to come out here and tell you that the tariffs against every country in the world are great, are fantastic, are wonderful, when I don't believe that. And then when Trump ends up removing those tariffs 2 weeks later, I'm not going to also tell you that that was brilliant and all a part of the plan. I'm going to remain consistent on my principles, and if it turns out I'm wrong in my assessment and what we ultimately end up seeing is a tariffed economy roaring just like his first term, then I will come out here and admit that I was wrong. But the fact is, what's going on right now is chaotic, and part of the reason why there's so much chaos is because the president really shouldn't have this authority that he's exercising in order to tariff every country in the world. The emergency tariff authority is supposed to be specifically tailored to national security, and as we found out during COVID, there are certain industries that we're going to have to prop up in order to keep production somewhat alive in the United States of America in order to secure us, but that is not the mechanism in order to make broad economic policy. I think it's actually on the Congress, and by the way, it should be on Democrats and Republicans to join together to find a veto-proof majority to actually take back the power to levy taxes, which is what a tariff is, and that is something that actually needs to be done, and I actually hope that's the ultimate outcome of the chaos that Trump is bringing. But unfortunately, as of right now, the Democrats are unwilling to do that because tanking the economy or allowing Trump to tariff and not tariff, causing chaos in the economy, is actually good for them politically. And by the way, it's not just good for them politically in terms of the midterms, it is good for them politically to set up the next potential candidate to win the presidential election of 2028. And I for damn sure don't want that to be Ocasio-Cortez first and foremost, and I don't want it to be Tim Walz or any of the other scumbags that they're coming up with, because the fact is, all of Trump's gains as of right now have been based on executive action. In fact, the overwhelming majority of policies from the Trump administration are just executive orders, which means the next person in office can reverse them on day one. And I don't want Ocasio-Cortez to be legislating with the pen like President Trump is. So honestly, right now, this should be a wake-up call to all the Republicans out there, all the people on Team MAGA, that the Republicans need to get their act together and actually codify some stuff into legislation so that we can actually preserve some of these policies for the future.
And from the waitress who is now speaking to you today from this podium, I can tell you, impossible is nothing.
So of course, Ocasio-Cortez throws back to the fact that she used to be a waitress, and she's like, oh, impossible is not impossible. And the thing is, it is an impressive story on its surface that Ocasio-Cortez went from waitress to politician and potentially is going to run for president maybe after she takes Chuck Schumer's Senate seat. In fact, this is so impressive that we had VP Kamala Harris pretending that she went from McDonald's to all of a sudden being a politician and whatnot, even though we know that was absolutely not the case. But But you might say, oh, well, that's not that impressive, or I don't really care about that, or whatever. But the fact is, it's a story that fits on a bumper sticker. It is one of the perfect things to attach to yourself while running for president, and Ocasio-Cortez has that. She also has the it factor, the star factor, which is what we seem to be looking for when people are nominated for a presidency. And while I want to say in my heart of hearts that if she were to win the Democratic nomination, she couldn't be president, the fact is, the Republicans nominated a celebrity that was known for being a game show host. I know he had businesses and whatnot, and he ended up winning twice. He ended up beating both of them. Also, if the Democrats nominate a woman like Ocasio-Cortez, we don't have the woman defeater, President Trump, who has knocked both attempts from the Democratic Party to install a woman as the president of the United States completely out of office.
And as Alexandria just said, when we stand together, when we do not allow them to divide us up, there is no stopping us.
Miracles start with mustard seeds. And that is what each and every one of you represent today. Small miracles of faith in ourselves, in each other, and in the refusal to give up.
So listen, I gotta be perfectly honest with everybody out there in the audience. I have no clue what miracles start with mustard seeds actually means. It sounds like absolute nonsense. But again, if you look at this ad, you look at the polish on it, you look at the crowds that are enthusiastic about Ocasio-Cortez, and you were to compare her to Elizabeth Warren, who looks awkward drinking a beer with her husband in her own home, you have to understand that there is just an elevated amount of charisma and polish in the media crew that is surrounding Ocasio-Cortez. She might not be better in terms of knowledge, she might not be better in terms of policies, but the fact is, what people vote for a lot of times is charisma, and in primaries, name recognition is the ultimate deciding factor. So Ocasio-Cortez, being one of the most famous people in Congress, and having that already when all these other Democrats are trying to play catch up, is a huge advantage. In addition to that, she is jumping off the fame of Bernie Sanders, trying to get the okay from his supporters, and that is a solid section of the base of the Democratic Party. Now, we see there are some competitors coming up that do present problems for Ocasio-Cortez. Jasmine Crockett is also somebody who's good at grabbing attention, grabbing headlines. I would not be surprised to see her run for president, and of course, I wouldn't be surprised to see her call Ocasio-Cortez racist in the primaries, because that is the game that they're playing. In addition to that, we also have to understand that the most important group of voters in the Democratic primary are black elderly Democratic voters, and they tend to vote for the more establishment candidate. This is likely going to be the base of somebody like a Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer, especially since Barack Obama is really high on Gretchen Whitmer, and that might be the candidate that he jumps behind. So of course, we're probably going to see a situation where if Ocasio-Cortez does run, if she does get that progressive wing, just like Bernie Sanders, her ambitions will end in South Carolina, but that still doesn't mean that she's not a threat. And again, I need you guys to understand, if she were to get the nomination for the Democratic Party, she has an excellent chance, because anybody who's the nominee for a major party has an excellent chance of being the president of the United States, especially if you're dealing with economic woes in the country as a whole. If people start to reject the evil orange man, which is entirely possible over the course of 4 years, then we could be set up for an absolute disaster, electing not only our first woman president, not only our first Latina or Latin ex-woman president, but our first communist president, and that's a disaster in every possible way. And remember, even though the Republicans are supposed to be set up for success by 2030 because of the way that people are moving from blue states to red states, that president who is elected in 2028 will be the person conducting the census. And if you were conducting the census and you butchered it like it was butchered in 2020, again into 2021 due to the COVID delays, then you end up in a situation where maybe the Republicans gain a lot of representation in the House due to the fact that they got more population, but they don't get the full representation that they should get. They don't get the full electoral college block that they should get, and that ends up setting up this country for the Democrats to have a better chance than they should for the next decade in this nation. So yeah, it's a very important election in 2028, and I don't know if the United States of America can deal with a legitimate communist president, but you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Ocasio-Cortez running for president. Till next time.